how would you define good UI, and why should business owners or managers within a company even care about it? Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Advancing Success, where we help businesses like yours become more successful. How do we do that? We uncover ways in which custom websites, apps, and software can take your business to a whole new level. I'm your host, Joe Sandine, and today we're going to talk about how user interface can make your employees more efficient and increase customer satisfaction. Joining us today is Mike Unser, one of our user experience architects. Mike has worked with hundreds of businesses throughout the years to take what can often be complex technical requirements and turn them into very simple tools that can help your business become much more efficient. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Joe.
So let's start very simple, Mike. How would you define good UI, and why should business owners or managers within a company even care about it?
It's a great question, Joe. I think one of the main things is trying to take complicated things and uncomplicating them for employees, for customers, whomever is using whatever system you're trying to improve. So, I mean, a lot of the projects we take on, we start with sometimes paper processes where they come in and they say, we've been doing this for years and we don't want paper floating around anymore. How can we digitize this? So taking that and finding a way to streamline it, digitize it, make it usable on laptops, desktops, phones, tablets, whatever it might be.
So in that example, the UI per se isn't even really technology. The experience that they're having is maybe just these antiquated ways of doing things in a business. And so that's the user experience they currently have, which is probably quite cumbersome. You're doing a lot of things redundantly. So, how do you make that better? What do you, when you analyze that with a business, what are you thinking when you're looking at, okay, all these different processes, we're passing paper back and forth. How do you turn that into what success needs to look like for the client?
That's a good question. I think one thing I like to do is I like to strip down the things that they're currently doing and make sure that they're not doing, like, I hate redundancy. Redundancy is one thing I really dislike. So anytime we can take redundancy out of processes, I like to do that. In cases where they're using things like paper, there's a lot of room for user error, data entry problems, you can't read people's handwriting, that kind of stuff. So anytime we can take those processes and digitize them in some way. And then the other thing that's nice with that too is then once you're collecting all that data and storing that data, then you can use that data as well. So like being able to like pre-fill things and just have things flow into the right places and have processes move from one step to the next to the next.
Yeah. I think you make a good point. When you're maybe not doing things electronically, and people are having to enter things write things down multiple times, you have that room for error and that room for, things not, even if someone has bad handwriting, for example, like that transposing that into the technology system at some point, can end up causing a lot of problems with bad data. So let's keep going down that train. So I know that one thing that people say often is you can't just take, garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yep.
Like bad data is just bad data. You can't really fix that. What do you normally do from a UI perspective to ensure that the data coming in is going to be good and that you're allowing someone to put it in as efficiently as possible so there's maybe less room for human error? Like I'm guessing there must be a lot of ways on the UI side that you're going to purposely design something so that the chances of a mistake are reduced and the amount of time they have to spend is reduced.
Yeah, I think one thing that can be done is, a lot of companies have data in different systems, right? Whether it's customer records, order records, whatever that might be. If we can use that data to pre-fill things. So like if someone goes in to start filling out a form and there's a customer entry area, if we can pull that data from a true source and there's only one area where that data is stored, we can either give them like a drop down to pick from or do IntelliSense where they start typing something in, and it'll give them suggestions as to which customer they're looking for, whatever that might be. I mean, once you start doing that stuff, that speeds up processes, it reduces data entry errors, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. There's so many little UI tricks that we can use to make people's lives easier. Even your example of if there's certain data we already know, don't make them fill it in a second time. Or maybe we can do are there predictive things that you can do, like based on some of the data they already put in? Maybe you can make some of the other fields auto-populate or predictively, know what the answer, or like limit the amount of options that might come later in the process.
Exactly. We were just talking to a client today about how they want to, right now they have this super complicated spreadsheet that they use for creating sales quotes, and they want to digitize it. So we started talking about where does this data live now? Can we pull it from somewhere? And if we can pull it from somewhere, if they choose one thing, then can we help them choose the next thing and the next thing and the next thing to then get them to a point where, well, these are the only options you can pick from. So then, once they're done with that process, it's a very kind of predictive or, accurate sales quote instead of people just putting in whatever they want.
Yeah. So it's got to be important, I'm assuming then, that a business either through this process of working with you or ahead of time understands their own business process. Do you normally find that they've got that kind of well-oiled and figured out, or do you take user interface design as an opportunity to help the business maybe come up with, well, what is the right process so we know the right data to collect, and what should happen next, and how many steps should be in the process? Like, how do you normally work through that, and how prepared is the client normally in that case?
That kind of is all over the board. Some clients come in knowing exactly what they're looking for. They know what they want to do. They know where their data's at and where to pull it from. And then some clients, they have some data over here that we can access. They have some over here we can access. Sometimes they want new data to access, essentially. So like the client I just talked about, they don't necessarily have customer records in their current client portal. So V1, they just want to be able to allow people to type customers' names in, but they see the benefit for a future enhancement to be a lookup type. So they can go look customers and clients up and auto-populate them. They know they don't, and that's where we have to kind of work with clients too, within their hours and their budget and their timelines to say, okay, well, what's MVP, what's V1? Let's get that done. And then let's think about how we can improve this even more moving forward.
Yep. So let's switch gears a little bit. So let's get into like the sales and kind of just general customer satisfaction perspective. So whether this is my public website and I've got, maybe it's a sign up or a process to request a quote, or maybe it's a portal that I built and there's some form of interacting with my business. What do you normally recommend people do to make sure that customer satisfaction is high, or to help them maybe increase sales? Like, are there certain trends and things that you're doing on the UI and the design side to just make that customer experience better, to get them to produce the outcomes that the business is looking for?
Yeah, I think simplifying always helps. I mean, people tend to want to ask everything in a form, and that's
so. Give me a basic example. So when you say simplifying, give me an example of what simplifying poorly done looks like, and then what simplifying well done might look like.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. So think about buying a car, right? We always use that as an example. So, when you come into a car website, Toyota, Honda, Cadillac, whomever it might be, they're going to try to get you down the path you're headed as fast as possible, right? So they're just going to give you what category of car are you looking? Are you looking for a car? Are you looking for an SUV? Are you looking for a large SUV? Are you looking for a sports car? Start there. And then once you say, well, I want an SUV. Well, do you want a small SUV, a midsize SUV, a large SUV? Just try to walk them down that path of getting just what you need. You don't need to know what color it's going to be. You don't need to know. I mean, there's certain things you don't necessarily need to know.
At that phase
At that
of
phase,
the game.
yeah. Like start off really high level and then get that kind of warm lead. And then, because that's where you can do more of that, like those customer touch points, those more one-on-one human interactions. Like we'll ask a lot of clients, well, you collect all this form data, but do you really need all this form data to get that kind of warm lead touch point? Like, can't you just ask really high level questions and then ask them how they want to be contacted and then reach out to them?
I think you make a good point. And this gets, I think, a little more into the marketing side, which isn't the topic for today. But I think it shows the importance of the order in which you ask questions and the journey you take someone through. Because, for example, let's just say in a multi-step process of interacting with a prospect, you might lose them at some point. They might abandon the process midway through. And so for the time they did spend, you want to make sure you got the right information at the beginning versus, if you would have asked them maybe too detailed of questions at the start, you just would have never gotten them far enough in the process. So when you're working with a customer, how do you normally help them break that down to say, okay, what's the best experience going to be to make sure that we start with the highest level stuff and work our way down so that even if they don't make it all the way through, we now have some information to pass on to the marketing team to maybe re-engage them later?
Yeah. I mean, I'll always ask people, if we can get you like 90% of the way there, what questions do you need answered to get 90% of the way there? Because you're never gonna get 100% typically, unless you're just selling a product somebody wants. Then it's just add to cart, check out. I mean, but a lot of our clients, it's more customized solutions, customized products. So, what are those super high level questions that get somewhere to the point where they're 90 to 95% of the way there on making a sale? You just have to get them over that last step to get them to the finish line, get them to the right person, that kind of stuff.
What would be some advice so if I've identified that, my user interface, it's old and clunky or it's too complicated, what do you normally think the first step or recommend the first step in the process is? So this is whether someone's working with you or I'm just doing this internally with people within my business. How do you normally start the process of going down this journey of maybe redoing the UI and coming up with something better?
Yeah, asking people who have used it, obviously.
So would you do a survey of your customers, for example?
You could certainly do a survey. You could ask people internally even to say, hey, we have this form we want customers to fill out and submit. It's not doing what we think it should be doing. It's not performing the way we think it should perform. Let's go out and fill it out and see what you guys think. And then, you could also do the same thing externally. I think the other thing too is like a lot of people will build these things and not necessarily even use them themselves. I mean, once you build something, use it and see if it works the way you expect it to work. If it doesn't, then you need to revisit it.
I think one thing too is, you could ask 10 different people a question about the user interface and maybe get 10 different ideas, recommendations, or ways they think it should be. I think you've always got to point back to the actual hard data. So it's really important that you have the numbers and the metrics, the conversion percentages, the bounce rate. There's all these different, in the marketing world, terms that you would use to determine if like different forms or pages on your website are working. I think it really comes down to trusting what the data is telling you as well. Would you agree with that? And what's your perspective on that?
100%. Yeah. Like that is one thing that people overlook a lot of the time is, looking at the actual numbers. Because a lot of times we'll have clients come in and say, well, we don't think people are, and this is just more of a traffic example, but like, we don't think anyone's looking at this page. We think everyone's looking at this page. But then you go look at the analytics and it's completely opposite. So sometimes you just have to kind of put that in their face and say, well,
Trust
what
the
you
data.
think and what the data is saying are two completely different things.
So let's put our crystal ball on a little bit and let's be predictors of the future. Or I guess I'm going to ask you to be a predictor of the future. What do you think is going to change? What's coming around the corner when it comes to user experience, user interface over the next 3 to 5, even 10 years? How do you think your job as a UI expert is going to adapt, and where are you going to be shifting people to from an experience perspective?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go back to my simplifying. Like you said, people don't want to spend a ton of time doing things. They want to get in and they want to get out. So anytime we can simplify, anytime we can make things easier. Obviously, everyone's doing things on their phones now. So there are certain things that are obviously going to be easier done on a laptop or desktop when you're filling out long, complicated forms, and sometimes that's not going to change. Like a job application, like an in-depth job application. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't want to fill that out on my phone. I know some people would. So, you have to kind of build to that so it can be done. But you got to kind of think about too, what a user's doing. If I were to apply for a job, which I'm not going to apply for a job.
That's good.
But if I were to apply for a job and I was on my phone, I would say, you know what, I'm going to come back to this when I'm sitting down and I have the time to go through this and like fill this out in full, because I don't want to do this on my phone. But if it's just sending a quick form submission to like a used car lot to say, hey, is this still available? And I want to talk about it. I want to be able to fill it on my phone and send it. So I think a lot of it is use case based. I think a lot of it it'll be really interesting to see if like AI type stuff is going to affect any of this or not. I mean, everyone's treading so lightly in that territory right now. It might, as far as like automating things to be able to fill things out and things like that. But yeah, I think a lot of it is just knowing what it is, knowing what the end goal is, and knowing how people are going to be doing what they're doing, whether they're like restaurants, for instance, like those should be, any website for a restaurant should be super mobile friendly, because you're out, you're driving around, you're telling your wife, let's find somewhere to eat. If it's not mobile friendly, they can't look at their menu. They can't contact you easily.
It's unusable.
Yeah.
I mean, when you literally have seconds at your disposal, to get something accomplished, it cannot be complicated to pull it off.
Yeah,
for sure.
So a lot of it depends on use case. A lot of it depends on what data you're trying to capture from a customer or whatever that might be. So I think just being aware of what it is you're trying to do. I mean, that's been UX for all the years I've been doing this. So, I mean, I don't think that's really going to change much.
Thank you, Mike, for joining us today. And thank you, everyone, for listening. We hope that you got some great insights out of today's conversation regarding UI and UX and all the great user experience things that you need to figure out when you're building your next website or app or custom software project. Don't forget to subscribe to the Advancing Success podcast for more useful tips. I'm Joe Sandine. Thanks for tuning in.